Pronouns are interesting to me, fascinating. Pronouns, he, she, they, we, it. It is an interesting pronoun. It's usually a matter of convenience. Regarding the purchase of an expensive Christmas gift, we might say to ourselves, was it worth it? And there's $100 or more reduced to a single vowel and a consonant. It. Did you take care of it? And there's a prenuptial agreement or a signature on divorce papers. It might be something as precious as a diamond ring or an elf on the shelf. It could be a glass of wine or a urine specimen. It could be the popular vote or the electoral college. It could be the entire year of 2016, or it could be the year that you stopped believing in Santa Claus. Poor God. And in tonight's passage, it swallows up the following. I wonder if you caught them. The decree issued by Emperor Augustus, which is a known world decree, everyone should return to their own towns and villages. The city of Bethlehem, which is this backwater little place northeast of Jerusalem. A flock of sheep. The inn, where there is no room for them. The manger, or even the multitude of the heavenly hosts. All of these can be reduced to IT, it. But consider what happens when we include, under the auspices of this profane pronoun, this terrifically celestial experience described in Luke's Gospel. The glory of God. Glory of God. It's often understood to be light, right? Or radiance, or weight. But the glory of God is really much more than can be conveyed with any word. You know what happens when we reduce glory, the glory of God, to it? It reduces it. It reduces glory to a faint and cheap imitation. And when glory gets lumped in the same category as a mangy goat, or a chunk of cow manure, or even the beard that Joseph strokes as he listens to Mary's birth pangs in the darkness, when that happens, that which is supposed to be this awesome breakthrough in human history, that which is supposed to be an intrusion into the normal course of events, gets reduced to what? A missing sock. And it. Dr. Arroway, you come to us with no evidence, no record, no artifacts, only a story that, to put it mildly, strains credibility. Over $500 billion was spent. Dozens of lives were lost. Are you really going to sit there and tell us we should just take all of this on faith? Dr. Arroway, is it possible that it didn't happen? As a scientist, yes, I must concede that. I must volunteer that. Wait a minute. Let me get this straight. You admit that you have absolutely no physical evidence to back up your story. Yes. You admit that you may very well have hallucinated this whole thing. Yes. You admit that if you were in our position, you would respond with exactly the same degree of incredulity and skepticism. Yes. Then why don't you simply withdraw your testimony and concede that your journey to the center of the galaxy, in fact, never took place. Because I can't. I had an experience. I can't prove it. I can't even explain it. But everything that I know as a human being, everything that I am, tells me it was real. I was given something wonderful, something that changed me forever. A vision of the universe that tells me undeniably how tiny and insignificant we are, and yet how precious and how rare. This is a bit of dialogue from the film Contact, which is a film based upon a book by Carl Sagan, which, as many of you know, he was an atheist until he died, and yet there was something in him that yearned for the transcendent, something beyond his reason. In Contact, an astronomer, played by Jodie Foster, I think, she goes through this experience, and then she has to defend what happened. She has to explain it. She has to explain her belief that an alien civilization somehow made contact with the human race, with her specifically. But what's intriguing for our purposes tonight is the nature of her testimony. I want you to think about this. She can't prove that she spoke with an entity. She can't prove it any more than she can prove that her father loves her. In fact, one of the other characters in the film says, "Did your father love you?" And she said, "Yes, absolutely." And he says, "Prove it." And she can't. She just believes it. She can't prove it. She can't produce any physical evidence to corroborate the claims of her relationship. She can't even begin to express the sheer beauty of her experience. And you see, this is exactly the problem with God's glory. God's glory isn't a thing. It's not even an extraterrestrial thing, in that it's purportedly beyond the empirical world, beyond the known and unknown universe. So why is it here? Why is glory here, strewn among the it items of the universe, where it can become tainted and degraded and perverted and polluted like everything else? Why is it here? Once upon a time, my guess is some baker of cakes came up with this colloquialism, and it goes like this: you can't have your cake and eat it too. You know this expression? And to be honest, I've always kind of not understood this expression. On a literal level, I would argue, if you're in possession of a cake, either you've made the cake or you bought the cake and now you own the cake, well, of course, you can eat it. Which is why I think there was this ambitious baker involved in this original saying, this astute businessman who realized he couldn't make the cake and then eat it before he sells it. Right? That would make sense, right? You can't have your cake and eat it too. But you see, this, according to Wikipedia, this pithy saying really means something quite the opposite. What we're supposed to glean from this proverb is that we cannot or should not try to have two incompatible things at the same time. Let me say that again. You can't have your cake and eat it too means, according to Wikipedia, you should not have two incompatible things at the same time. For example, you should not have God's glory mixing it up with a placenta. Does everyone know what a placenta is? They're pretty messy. We should not try to imagine the severing of an umbilical cord with the uncreated light of a living God, the one who made the planets and solar systems and the exploding stars. These two things are incompatible. God's glory and the stuff of the world. But there it is. There it is. In his book, David Bentley Hart, it's a book called The Beauty of the Infinite, he says, we human beings desire, right? That's kind of the core of who we are. We desire. And he says, most of all, we desire what? A connection with beauty, with glory. And he says, genuine desire is dwelling alongside of glory. It's a possession in the intimacy of dispossession. In other words, it's something that we want to get close to, but if we try to grab it and make it ours, we ruin it. It's something that has to be at a distance and yet close enough that we say, yes, I desire that. Otherwise, there's no more desire. It is there. Glory. It's there not in the Bible passage that's been printed and reprinted, copied and recopied a million times over. It's there in the story that's communicated face to face, eyeball to eyeball, between people like us. It's there in the possibility that it's true. And what do I mean by true? I mean the possibility of the God of the universe addressing, summoning you. You. I read a story once. A young boy used to help an elderly lady with her groceries. And this happened evidently in the 1930s. When you could exactly buy pieces of candy and toys with a few cents. And apparently, this widow who lived in a small house alone had given the boy a few extra coins around Christmas. And so she did this time. Mrs. Goldberg gave 2 whole dimes to this helpful delivery boy, and then she asked him into her kitchen for some freshly baked sugar cookies and a piece of fruitcake. Well, the boy obliged, and he sat at the table nibbling on the food, not so much the fruitcake, but the cookies. And Mrs. Goldberg asked him questions about what subjects she liked at school and if he hoped to receive any special gifts for the holidays. See, Mrs. Goldberg didn't really celebrate Christmas. But then the wise woman must have sensed that the boy wanted to go. In fact, he did. After all, with his 20 cents, there were any number of things that he could buy at the 5 and dime. The possibilities were endless. And so Mrs. Goldberg packaged up a piece of the fruitcake, and the boy put on his coat, and he listened as she told him just one more story, just a parting story just for him. She hadn't told it in a long time. It was about a cottage that she and her husband shared before her son died. And how happy they were all there, cozy, with the wood stove in the cottage and the stone chimney and the smoke billowing up in the sky. And as she said goodbye, she pronounced the boy's name in a strange way, David, David. And he bolted out the door. David went right to the store where he couldn't decide what to buy. There were so many options, so many bright and shiny things, so many interesting things. But then up the main aisle to the left, he spotted a card, a Christmas card, and on the front of the card there was this image of a cottage. And it had a stone fireplace coming out of the roof and smoke billowing up. And it reminded him of the story Mrs. Goldberg said before he left. And he barely had any money left, but he reached into his pocket and he found 2 pennies. And something clicked in his mind and in his heart, and he bought that card. He bought that card, and he found the empty place inside the card, and he signed his name in big, ugly block letters. And then he ran to Mrs. Goldberg's house. He didn't want to disturb her. He slipped the card under the door. And that night he slept well. He slept well and he had dreams. Well, in the morning, the very next day, when David woke up, he received word from his mother and father that Mrs. Goldberg had passed away in the night. In unbelieving, almost in shock, he ran from his house to her house, went through the back door that he had only entered the day before, and he passed the kitchen table where he had sat, and he called as if she were still there, "Mrs. Goldberg, Mrs. Goldberg," as if she could hear him. And then peering around the corner into the bedroom, he saw a light, a night light. It was still on. And next to the night light, Mrs. Goldberg's pillow with the indent and the shape of her head still in the pillow. Also beneath the light, David saw the open envelope and the card he'd given her. It was there. It was there. It was there next to a cup of tea and a piece of half-eaten fruitcake. It was there. Glory, glory. And he ate the fruitcake.